Hi guys, it's Kirsty. Today's video is about disputing irrational beliefs, and I want to offer some tips that may be of help as you go about disputing your irrational beliefs. But before I get into that, I'd just like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So for anybody who doesn't know what irrational beliefs are, we refer to them quite a lot on this channel. So irrational beliefs are beliefs that we would hold, that all human beings would hold, that bring us a sense of, that bring on extreme negative emotions such as depression, rage, or perhaps anxiety. And they are irrational beliefs rather than rational beliefs because they are unscientific. So when you actually break down these beliefs and start examining them, you start to see that they don't actually make a whole lot of sense. So firstly, we would need to, in order to start working on disputing our irrational beliefs, we need to start trying to identify what these irrational beliefs actually are. So when it comes to anxiety and OCD, we might try to work out, okay, so this is my theme, or this is what's bothering me. What is the worst case scenario here? So you might start working backwards. For example, if somebody is suffering with harm OCD, perhaps more specifically hit and run. So you might say, okay, so what's the worst case scenario? Okay, so the worst case scenario is I went out in my car driving the other day, and that thing that I thought felt a bump, it actually turns out it's a person. And I want to go and to that same spot and check to see if there's a person there. You might say, well, what if you didn't do that? You know, what if you just go along thinking this is probably OCD, so not going to do that? What if you didn't do that? What is the worst case scenario? So that person might say, well, I might have actually hit someone. They might be lying there dead. So then it's kind of like, okay, so what does that mean? So somebody might say, well, that means that I've ended a life and, you know, I couldn't possibly stand to live with myself if I did that. Or it might be, well, it might be led back to me. Somebody may have saw, and then I might end up going to prison. So there's a couple of different fears here. Firstly, there's the fear of living with that guilt that you killed somebody. Secondly, there's a fear of going to prison. So also with going to prison, there's perhaps the further stigma of not being accepted by society, other people thinking that you're awful and losing your family. So what you would do there is, and then you'd say for either of those either of those things that you might be afraid of, or it might be both of them, because quite often there'll be a couple of different sort of particular fears that might be fueling an obsession or theme. So you might say, what is so awful about both of those things? So in order to identify the irrational belief that creates the fear surrounding the worst case scenario, it helps to look for where you're using language such as it would be awful if, or it would be terrible if, I couldn't stand it if, I couldn't possibly tolerate it if. So this is awfulizing. So you're probably awfulizing somewhere when it comes to your beliefs around the worst case scenario. So firstly, you want to identify, you know, what are you awfulizing? So you're awfulizing, the idea of, you know, how awful it would be of you to have killed somebody and not own up to it. Or you might be awfulizing the idea of going to prison and what that means, and saying that you couldn't possibly stand it. There's other ways that it's other irrational beliefs that, might be fueling your fear surrounding other worst case scenarios. For example, if somebody was suffering with relationship OCD and they feared they didn't love your partner. So you might look at, what's your worst case scenario? Okay, so it might be that you stay in a loveless relationship, for example, or you leave your partner. So the irrational belief surrounding the worst case scenario of leaving your partner might be that you couldn't stand it, it would be awful. So again, it's awfulizing. But the irrational belief surrounding, okay, why is it so bad to be in a loveless relationship? It might be that you're making musts and shoulds about yourself. So you might be saying, you must love your partner, otherwise you can't possibly stay in the relationship, or, you know, you should love your partner, or you should feel happy all the time with your partner. So another kind of irrational belief that might drive kind of, you know, extreme unpleasant emotions such as anxiety, rage or depression are where we're saying, you know, things must be a certain way, or it should be a certain way. So you might be saying, I must be, or I should be a certain way. Or you might be saying somebody else must or should be a certain way, or that life must or should be a certain way. And then you may go on from that to say, and I couldn't stand it if it wasn't that way, or something like that. So then you've kind of roundabout, you've got kind of a bit of an irrational belief that is fueling the negative feelings around your worst case scenario. So once you've got that, and it doesn't have to be, one thing I will stress here is that you could get, you know, hung up on exactly what it is, but generally it will be along the lines of, but that would be awful if that happened. I couldn't stand it. Oh, it'll be so horrible. It's the worst possible thing. Or it should be, or it could be like, no, that would be awful because it shouldn't be that way, or it mustn't be that way, or I mustn't let that happen. So don't get too hung up on the wording of the irrational belief. The fact of the matter is, in some way, you will be awfulizing the worst case scenario. So once you've identified that worst case scenario and what that means to you, you can assume that you're awfulizing in some way, or you're making strict rules for yourself that things must be a certain way, or you must be a certain way. Or you may also be proclaiming that you are a terrible person, perhaps, if things are a certain way, you know, or you might be just saying that you are completely evil if you don't go back and check to see if you ran someone over, or if you stay with your partner even though you're having thoughts that you don't love them. And that's black and white thinking. So along with awfulizing, there may also be black and white thinking. So then here we want to bring a bit of scientific thinking into it. So you want to then sort of examine the irrational belief, however it's worded. As I say, don't get hung up on that. And start looking at, can I prove this? Can I prove this is awful? Because what we want to do is, if we're awfulizing, we're basically saying that's as bad as it could possibly get. It's the worst possible thing. So it's up here if it's awful or terrible or something. And we want to bring those feelings down from there to here. So you then could start looking at, okay, is this as bad as it could possibly be? No, there will generally always be other things that are worse than what you're afraid of. So, for example, if you're worried, you know, if the worst case scenario is, you know, going to prison or something, well, that could be a lot worse, because you could be going somewhere where you will be tortured for all of eternity. So straight away it could be worse, or it could be worse because you may be going into the, you know, rather than going to prison, you might be going to the electric chair. Or it might be worse that you might be going into prison and being regularly tortured. So that immediately it brings it all down. And then you could start considering, if you did go to prison, you'd still get a roof over your head. It wouldn't be pleasant. Yes, you would miss your family, but there are very good there's a lot of good rehabilitation in prison. There, you know, you will get fed, you could get educated in prison, you could sort of start working in some way, you can, you know, get a little bit of exercise. So you can start looking at, you know, it wouldn't be pleasant going to prison, but you most definitely could stand it, and it wouldn't be the most awful thing that you have made it out to be. So then you want to start working on, rewording this irrational belief into a rational belief. So it would be it would be very unpleasant and a strong preference not to go to prison. But if I did go to prison, it wouldn't be the worst thing, and I most definitely could stand it. While you're working on disputing the irrational beliefs, it's also useful to look at, if it really was truly so awful, everybody would have that reaction to it and people wouldn't live through it, basically. But you can look at how, and I'm going to continue using the prison example for now, just for consistency. But you can look at people who have come out of prison and moved forward with their lives. Yes, it would have been very unpleasant for them, but they did stand it, because if they didn't stand it, they would never have made it through. But they did stand it. The world didn't implode on them. But also, you could, another thing for me, sort of with some of my examples, that I've experienced, so with relationship OCD, it was useful for me to remind myself, well, if, if there's a fear of losing the relationship here, well, you've stood other relationship breakups and the world didn't end. And in hindsight, you were glad they happened, because it led you to, the next thing that came along, in the end, once you got over it, which you always did every time. Plus, also, I would look at other people and be like, well, they're not, it doesn't fill them with the same level of fear as it fills me. So clearly it's not a hard and fast rule that it would be awful, because it's something that I've made up because that person doesn't think it would be. Even when you look at sometimes other OCD sufferers and they don't have your theme, it's like, okay, it might be that they're not so scared of that particular thing. There's something else that they think is more awful. So therefore, that is your proof that it comes down to a matter of perspective and that it's not factual. And, it's the lack of it being factual that makes it unscientific. And if it's unscientific, it's therefore irrational. So that's one good way of looking at these things. But once you've kind of listed all the reasons why this worst case scenario wouldn't be awful, you've examined that other people have lived through it, you've examined that you would maybe still have your basic human requirements met, you've got that. You need to convince your brain even more to actually start believing the new rational belief that it's not awful and you can stand it, in order to bring down the anxiety and help reduce the compulsions, whether that's, physical compulsions, mental compulsions, or if it's, automatic rumination. That's going to happen probably if your brain thinks you're in this terrible danger because you think it's all so terrifying. So in order to do this, it's good to look at the benefits of changing the belief and really going for it, and not only changing the belief cognitively, but practicing your actions going in line with the new belief. So not avoiding and not doing compulsions where you can. So that's another, it's good to be conscious of your actions, that your actions are backing up the new rational belief that you can stand it and it wouldn't be awful. Because if you're still doing compulsions that are in your control, then you're going against, you're still backing up the irrational belief. The same goes for avoidance, which is essentially a type of compulsion, really. So you need to, look at the benefits of really, really taking on this new rational belief, because it's going to be hard, because for many years we've held irrational beliefs. Many people around us in society that has, helped contribute to these irrational beliefs will all still be holding on to these irrational beliefs. So we really, really, really need to look at how can it benefit you? You've got to sell it to yourself, really, as well as kind of drumming it into yourself, speaking firmly to yourself, but always compassionately, but firmly in a, rather than, come on, no, this isn't awful. It's like, no, this isn't awful because people have lived through it. So speaking firmly like that. But also, like I say, the benefits, really, really, you've got to speak to yourself here. So what has holding on to this irrational belief brought you? So think of all the things that you've lost because of your OCD surrounding this theme. Think of all the events that you've been to that you were distracted from, or maybe relationships that you've lost because of OCD, or jobs that you've left because of your levels of anxiety, or sports, hobbies, any passions that you may have given up because of it, or times when you've not been present with your children because of it, because of the suffering that holding on to the irrational belief brings you. It really helps to bring all of these into your consciousness, your awareness. So when I was working through, and I still do, need to remind myself when I identify that I'm holding on to an irrational belief, show myself what negativity it's bringing to me, that it's not the circumstances or the worst case scenario that's causing the anxiety and the negative emotions. It's the irrational belief that I'm holding on to, choosing to hold on to, surrounding that's bringing on the negative feelings and all these negative things. So really think about what holding on to this belief, this strong belief, and these behaviors. Think about where they've got you and what they've lost you potentially. And then you can think about the benefits of change, getting rid of this irrational belief and changing it to your new rational belief. Will you be more present with your loved ones? Do you think maybe you'll be able to have more fun, be in the moment? Maybe you'll be able to concentrate better at work. Maybe you'll enjoy eating your meals at night without the mental rumination going on in the background. Maybe you'll have more energy to spend doing creative things that you've wanted to do. So it's one thing, talking about, disputing that actually, no, this belief is irrational and unscientific. But it's another thing to make yourself truly believe that. And this is where I do think it's good to show yourself the negatives of holding on to the irrational belief and the positive and the gains of changing the irrational belief into a rational belief. And I think it's, really, really important. And you have to go, to be firm about it with yourself. In the book, Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Albert Ellis says that you do need to, argue strongly that this is, that it is irrational, and argue strongly the benefits of changing it, because you're strongly holding on to that irrational belief at the moment, which is why it's causing so much turmoil. So I hope this video has been useful in terms of kind of going about, firstly, identifying your rational belief. And to get there, it's identifying the worst case scenario, and then you can work out what the belief is around that. So, the worst case scenario is the circumstances, the consequence. The thing that's fueling your negative feelings is not the worst case scenario, it's your irrational belief surrounding the worst case scenario. So identify your worst case scenario, from, work backwards from your theme, what's the thought, and then work backwards. What does that mean? What does that mean? And then what? Why is that so bad? You identify the irrational belief. So what are you saying must be? What are you saying should be? What are you saying is so awful? Or, is it black and white? Are you saying I'm completely awful if this one thing happens, even though you're capable of many other acts, not just that? So look for your awfulizing, your black and white thinking, and your shoulds and your rules for life and how things must or should be. Start arguing, is this actually rational and scientific? Give evidence as to why not. And then look for the things that, reasons why you should, why you would want to change your irrational belief into a more rational belief. What's the gains here? And what is the negative impact if you don't? So I just want to offer some practical tips for when we're doing our disputing. So firstly, you might wonder, how often do I need to do it? How long do I need to do it for? And I think this is something that's, you can make it work for you depending on how your day sort of pans out. But I think as a general guide, maybe you would spend 20 minutes a day generally doing your disputing. You could, you know, if you're struggling a lot, you could do 30 minutes if you wanted, and when it starts to ease up a little bit, you could go down to 10 minutes, and you might choose to do this in one chunk in a day. Or personally for me, I split it out into 2 chunks in a day. So I'd just do 15 minutes of disputing in the morning and 15 in the evening. So that was how it kind of worked out for me. And as I started to kind of work on it more and more, I was able to kind of bring this down to doing it for 10 minutes at a time. And then, you know, then you might just do it perhaps once a day for 10 minutes a day. And then gradually you'll find that you can start reducing how much you're doing your disputing as well. As you work on, you know, as you start to become a little bit less stuck. So the second tip I wanted to offer is don't try and dispute thoughts as they come in, or don't try and dispute the fear as thoughts come in, because that is, you know, you're giving the thoughts lots of attention in the moment, which is not what we want to do. You want to be, you know, try and leave them there where you can, and save your disputing for your allotted times that you're planning to do your disputing. So don't respond to the thoughts with disputing. This can easily become compulsive. And this is another thing I wanted to say as well. If you find yourself wanting to do some of your disputing work because you're having a spike and you're perhaps doing it to relieve yourself of that discomfort, that's how you know when you're doing it compulsively, and you may just want to delay it perhaps. That's just a little tip I have. You know, say if you find yourself at lunchtime, you're having a bad day, say if you usually do your disputing in the morning and the evening, but at lunchtime you're having a bad day, so you decide, I need to do some disputing now, and I recommend not doing that. Just keep an eye on how you're you know, if you're disputing, in order to bring down discomfort in the moment, because that's when it's kind of compulsive. The next tip I wanted to offer as well is to try not to get overwhelmed by the amount of IBs that you start to work out that you have. As human beings, we're going to have a lot of them anyway, and you know, as OCD sufferers, we're, you know, bearing in mind that the fear reaction is going to be turned up on full volume with various things. So you'll find that certain fears or IBs that you're disputing will end up covering across like certain themes and thoughts anyway. But you might still find that quite a few keep popping up as you go, and that's not unusual. And what you can do is, as you know, if you feel like you've got another one that you need to work on, rather than getting overwhelmed with it, jot it down. So make a list, and you know, you can work on some of the other IBs, irrational beliefs that you might have, once you've kind of been, you know, gotten confident with working on the main ones that might be fueling your core, you know, your core theme or your current theme, that brings you the most distress. So once you've started to bring down the fear level on those IBs, then you can move on to some of the others. And this is an ongoing process as well. You know, we're not in a race at, you know, trying to change our IBs. And because there's likely to be quite a few, you will need to practice a bit of patience with yourself there as well. And if there are some IBs that you discover that have to wait to be disputed for a few months, then so be it. You know, don't put yourself under time pressure, because OCD will be aware of that, and it will be interfering with it. So those are my main tips for disputing. You know, there's a bit of a practical guidance there, because, you know, there is logistics involved. I would recommend doing it in a way that you're not going to be, you know, interrupted as well. So, you know, when you know your partner's not going to ask you questions, or your children aren't going to need things from you, or, you know, at work when people might be asking you questions, because you do need to be conscious and engaged as you're doing them. So, I would try and make sure that's, you know, that you've got a bit of space while you're doing it as well, just for your insanity, really. Actually, I think that's possibly the best reason for that one. It kind of goes in line with prioritizing your OCD recovery. So I hope that has been helpful for you, because it can be quite intimidating when you first start learning about acceptance and irrational beliefs. And it can be hard to know how to go about it. And like, I don't even know how to find my irrational belief, but, you know, we all hold them. And what I will say is, you know, we all hold plenty of them as well. So there won't just be, there might not just be one fueling that your theme. So look out for that as well. But hope this has been helpful. Thank you for watching and take care. Bye.